But anyway, it's so good to see a full screen of wonderful folks here today. Elizabeth, we've been looking very forward to your presentation. It's very exciting that you have moved to South Carolina. We're always anxious to welcome someone who has, really put their heart and soul into inspiring others and stepping up to, make it their life's work to share, what makes them feel good and help us see the same. And the information about Lourdes France sounds very exciting. If Lance weren't driving, he would talk about, I'm sure, the study abroad. So he takes students on through France. And so he is very anxious also to hear your presentation, as all of us are. Candace and Julia, Julia, I know knows you even better than I do. I know that you're an author. I kind of did a little bit of trolling on the internet. I think it looks like you have 4 very handsome sons, or at least there were 4 very.
I do.
At least there were 4 very handsome young men in a picture with you. And is there anything else, Julia, that you would like to add before we turn the floor over to Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'll do the little brief bio that she sent to me. That just it has a little bit more than what Candace sent out. And then Alberto and Franca, you can make sure that I'm also saying her name right, is Elizabeth Ficocelli. Ficocelli is a best-selling, award-winning author of 15 books for adults and young people, including Lourdes, Font of Faith, Hope, and Charity. And Lourdes France is what she's going to be talking about today. She's written for several national Catholic magazines. In addition to her writing, she's a frequent guest on Catholic radio and television, talking about numerous subjects such as saints, sacraments, and miracles. She's also the host of vocation programs on St. Gabriel Catholic Radio, AM 820. She's a sought-after speaker for conferences, parish events, schools, and retreats. She enjoys sharing her love and enthusiasm for faith with audiences of all ages. And for more information, I'm going to put her website in the chat area. Elizabeth moved to Savannah Lakes Village about 4 years ago from Columbus, Ohio, where she and her husband raised their 4 very handsome boys. She's been working in advertising and shifted to writing to allow her to stay at home while raising her boys and still be active with her career. And over time, she started speaking about her writing at publishing events. And then this led to radio time speaking about her work and evolved into public speaking at the event. I actually haven't met Elizabeth in person, but I did stalk where she lives, which is around the corner from me, and the other night on my dog walk. So I learned about her through our community newsletter, where her husband was announcing that she was going to give a talk on the local radio station about Lourdes France. And I immediately sent him a note and said, hey, would you do a Rotary meeting? I love to travel, and so I'd love to hear more about a place that I've never been. And Elizabeth, thank you for taking time to share the history of Lourdes with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I love talking about these subjects. So thanks for the invite. And if you're ready for me to go ahead and share my screen, I will do that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Gotta love technology. So let's see here. And I just got to get to slide view as soon as that moves out of the way. I want to just move that out of the way. Let's see. You can first, so you can see that so far, right? I want to
get, it looks very good.
Yeah, I want to get to this. I want to get to the slideshow.
If you click slideshow up on the upper bar.
Yeah, I know. I've got that like the mute thing, all that up there blocking it at the moment. So I'm just trying to see how I can get past that.
Elizabeth, another easy way to do it, if you go down to the bottom right hand of your there you go. Look, okay, over just a tiny bit to the right.
Perfect. Yeah, that's right. That'll work. Okay. All right, how's that for everybody? Can everyone see?
That's good.
Here we are. Love it. Well, thank you. And thanks for the invite again, Julia. And it is a pleasure to talk about any of these subjects for me. I just get really enthused. But Lourdes in particular is an absolute beautiful place. It attracts some 7 million visitors every year, most of them pilgrims, but visitors, tourists, curiosity seekers. And they come, I think, because A, it's beautiful, B, it's historic, and C, there's a spiritual aspect of it. And I think that attracts people from different walks of life. Lourdes is located in the very southern part of France. So if you're picturing the country of France, all the way down towards the Spanish border in something called the Pyrenees Mountains. They're not like the Swiss, they're not like the French Alps. Beautiful though, beautiful rolling hills, tree cover, just like this picture. And it's an absolute beautiful place. And I had the privilege of going there back in 2006, I believe it was. And I was sent over there to write a book on Lourdes, and I had never been there. So I went over, they were ready to commemorate the 150th anniversary of Lourdes, which started in 1858, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But so I went over there kind of wearing two hats. I went over there as an investigative journalist and also then as a pilgrim to experience it for myself, and then to compile that into a book called Lourdes, Font of Faith, Hope, and Charity. And this is one of my 15 books. So this is one of my books for adults, because I do write for young people as well. And the story of Lourdes starts with a young girl named Bernadette Subaru. Some of you may be familiar with that name. And the year is 1858. And Bernadette is a very impoverished child. Her family is probably the poorest family in Lourdes. And she's sickly, kind of frail in health, and very uneducated. And so nothing remarkable about this child or her family, but it's around her where this story will start. And one day on February 11th, 1858, on a cold French morning, because France is similar to where I used to live in Ohio, so it's winter in France. And Bernadette and her sister and her friend went out to look for firewood. And firewood was important back then because, first of all, you could burn it and keep warm. That was important. But you could also sell firewood for some coins and buy bread for your family. And so Bernadette and these two other girls set out, and they knew they had to avoid private property because they didn't want to be trespassing. So they sought that day a new area, and it's called Mazabiel, which means old rock in French. And it's essentially, this is this picture back in 1858 or that time about, and it is a sheer rock wall on the face of this side of this hillside, where the Gave River runs right by it, and had kind of hollowed out a section in the middle into a kind of an indentation, cave-like indentation, not very deep. And this is where the girls thought, hey, it would be a great place to gather firewood because the water would push it up into this area. And so they were there that particular morning when Bernadette would have a vision. And this would be the first of 18 visions she would claim to have in this location at the grotto. The others would not be able to see what she saw, but she would claim to see this beautiful young lady, someone similar to her own age. And over the series of these 18 appearances, Bernadette was given some messages that could be summarized in about one sentence. Basically, the messages were having to do with turn your life back to God, repent of your sins, and do penance for the sins of the world. And that was basically the message. It wasn't a long, complicated, drawn out message. And Bernadette faced some resistance in the beginning, not only from her own family, who didn't want to believe this, but the clergy themselves, the police. But I think over time, it was Bernadette's character that really attracted people. Like, she wasn't trying to make a spectacle of herself. She seemed very honest, very sincere. And more people began to come to the grotto and kind of check out what was going on there. And I think that what makes Lourdes so different than other sites of what we would call Marian apparitions is what happened midpoint in these series of visions. And that's when this beautiful young lady tells Bernadette to dig in the dirt in the recess of this rock wall and dig for a spring and wash her face and drink the water there. And Bernadette is digging and there's no water there. And she keeps digging and digging. And finally, she reaches some sort of wet dirt and then eventually some muddy water. And she begins to drink that water and wash her face in it, as the lady was telling her to, for the sins of the world, as a kind of an act of penance. And the onlookers, as you can imagine, probably had mixed reactions to this. Why is this girl, playing in the mud? What is this about? But later that day, sure enough, right in that spot where she was digging, this bubbling, clear spring came forth. And within 24 hours of that, people began to claim healings from the water. And I think this is what really propelled people to want to find out about Lourdes and come to Lourdes, because once the word got out that there were some healings from a spring in this mountainous town of Lourdes, people began to come by the droves. And at first it was people from France itself, from that region of France, but then pretty soon all of France. And then with the advent of the train system into Lourdes, because before that it was really off the beaten path, people from all over Europe and beyond could start to come to this place of phenomena. And they came on gurneys and wheelchairs. Many of them died on the journey because it was a very arduous journey, and these people were already very sick, very compromised. And they would come, and this has been the phenomenon ever since. But the other phenomenon that's very interesting with this is that as these people were descending upon this little mountain town, the people there realized they had to provide hospitality. They had to take care of these people. They had to help them, especially being so compromised. And so this spirit of hospitality stemmed right from the beginning of the days of Lourdes, where all the townspeople, whether they were upper class or just the ordinary townsfolk, literally, rolled up their sleeves and worked shoulder to shoulder, side by side, to accommodate and welcome these people seeking a healing. So that's a beautiful phenomenon, and I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. So these claims of healings just started going crazy. I mean, it was like every Sunday they'd be announcing, oh, and this person got healed and this person got healed. And so the church had to step in pretty quick and say, well, wait a minute, we need a little system here. We need to have a structure. We need to evaluate what's going on so that people aren't just willy-nilly, claiming, oh, this happened or that happened to me. And so they would start a very strict process to evaluate these. I'm going to come back to that story also, but this picture shows you an earlier picture of the grotto, and you can see all the crutches hanging on the walls around the grotto. And this was, people's claim that, they were healed. And the thing that's kind of remarkable about Lourdes is, this claims of apparitions and messages and so forth was approved in a very short time. And it's unusual for the church to move that quickly. A lot of times the church won't move at all on something like this, but it could take decades or even centuries for the church to give a thumbs up on this. But surprisingly, in about 4 years after these apparitions, and the apparitions just lasted a few months in 1858, and then they were done. But the church, based on Bernadette's credibility, her character, the simplicity of the messages, saw fit to approve it. And so a shrine started being built directly above the grotto. But the thing was, so many people were coming into Lourdes at that time that this one church wasn't going to hold them all. It was way too small by the time it was completed. And so they built another and another and another, and several churches exist on the sanctuary today. And this is a picture of that same church. So to the far right there with the big spire on it, that's that original basilica that was built directly above the grotto. So you can see underneath it, that dark gray wall. Well, that's the grotto, still maintained. They built everything around that grotto. So it's a place that people can go and visit and actually go there, pray there, and so forth. And in front of that original basilica is another church called the Church of the Holy Rosary with the 2 spires. And then, as I said, there's others around the grounds. But the thing I wanted to point out in this picture, my husband joined me on this trip back then, and he works with people with disabilities for a lifetime. That's his career. And we were so amazed at how accessible this sanctuary that was established in 1858 or shortly after, has been through all the years to accommodate these many, many people who still come in those wheelchairs and on those gurneys. There's ramps everywhere, and it's very hilly terrain. So it's just beautiful to see how accommodating this sanctuary still is to people with disabilities today. And this is a picture of the grotto itself. So you can walk in there and, people are touching the walls, and you can see up in the right-hand corner, that niche, that opening is where Bernadette claimed to see the lady from the beginning. And so there's a statue up there to represent that. But as you walk into the grotto, in the deepest part of the recess is a hole in the floor, and there's a plexiglass window over it. And you can look in there and you can see the spring that still is flowing since the days that it was uncovered by Bernadette back in 1858. And then the water is piped out of this location through the sanctuary in 2 ways. The first way are the water taps. So there are water taps in the sanctuary where people can, kind of like in the footsteps of Bernadette, be drinking that water, washing their hands or face in it. They can fill water bottles with it and take this water home to loved ones. to family and friends. When we were there back in 2006, we were able at the time to bring very large jugs of water home on the plane, like with the luggage in the belly of the plane. I don't know now, with so many restrictions on planes and fluids and so forth, that how you're able to do that. But the point is, this was a very popular tradition always since the beginning, that people can take the water for themselves and bring it back home. And then the other place that the water is distributed at Lourdes are in the baths. And there are bathhouses for men, for women, and for children. And the process of being submersed in the baths, in the water of the Lourdes Spring, is a very personal, discreet, but beautiful and powerful experience, where you are submerged up until to your neck, as deeply in the water. And they do the best they can to find people who work there to assist you in your language, because many languages are spoken at the shrine. And so they would match you with someone who would speak your language. Now, what I'm told is, since COVID, they are not immersing people in the waters right now. They're doing something called the pouring of the waters, and they pour the water on your hands, and they'll pray with you, and you go through the process that way. I don't know if and when they will return this full immersion of the water, but that's kind of the process. And if you remember, I was speaking earlier about the hospitality, the spirit of hospitality at Lourdes. This is so evident, and I thought it kind of would resonate with your Rotary Club, because I looked up a little bit about your organization, and I know you're about peace and goodwill and helping mankind, and that is so much what Lourdes is about to this very day. Every year, thousands of people come to the shrine to work as volunteers. They are specially trained. They come there on their own nickel. They're not paid to do that. They take their own vacation time. And they work at the shrine, whether it is pulling people around on transportation vehicles like this, whether it's working in the cafeterias or the places of accommodation, or at the processionals or at the masses or whatever it is. They're there, they're friendly, they're helpful, and they're young, which is important because this place is incredibly hilly. So to pull people, around it and push people around it is not easy. And so there's a spirit of youth there. There's a spirit of humanity helping humanity. And that's just one of the beautiful things about the shrine all these years later. And every day in the season of, say, May to October is the primary season of Lourdes. There are two processions that you'll see happening. And this is the daytime procession. It's called the Eucharistic procession. And in the front, you see there a priest or a series of priests, and they're processing the Eucharist. One of the really beautiful things in that spirit of Lourdes accommodating people with disabilities is, during processionals, if you were, say, in a wheelchair or something, they would have you come to the very front of the processional, and everybody else waits and gets in behind them. So it's always giving people with disabilities the first rows in the pew, the first places in the processional. It's just beautiful and very appropriate, really. So that's the daytime procession. And then this one you may be more familiar with. This is the very famous procession at night. It's called either the torchlight or the candlelight procession. And this is where people, like just a multitude of people, will come carrying their candles. There's singing, there's praying. They go throughout the shrine, and then they gather here in front of the Church of the Rosary, and there's that original basilica there in the background. And it's really beautiful. It's beautiful to take part in, but my husband and I had a really special privilege during this. The organization that brought me over to Lourdes to write that book is an American organization that has been sending American volunteers to Lourdes for a number of years, because there's a very strong need for English-speaking volunteers at Lourdes. I'd mentioned there's many languages at Lourdes. If you go to Lourdes, you'll hear French, obviously. You'll hear Spanish, German, you'll hear Italian, you'll hear Dutch, and then you'll hear English. And it's truly in that order. So this organization helped me not only to arrange interviews with all the key players over there at the time, the bishop, the head of the medical bureau, the director of hospitality, but they also provided me with interpreters, because I don't speak French, and most of the people I interviewed for the book don't speak English, so we needed interpreters. But the other special privilege we got through this organization was when this procession here, this candlelight procession, gathers in front of that particular church, they pray the rosary in about 5 languages. And so on one given night, my husband and I were to lead the English part of the rosary. And I will tell you, as a speaker, I have spoken at conferences, I've spoken in front of a couple of thousand people. This was literally a sea of humanity, candles and people as far as the eye could see. I don't know, tens of thousands. I don't know. It was definitely the largest audience I have ever spoken in front of, but really, really a remarkable experience. And I think one of the most fascinating, and I talk a lot about this aspect of Lourdes on radio and so forth, and it's the process of how miracles and healings and these claims get analyzed and approved, because there is a process. As I said, since probably 10 years after the event started, there's a very rigorous process. So taking you through it real quick, like if you were, say you're an American tourist and you're over at Lourdes or you're a pilgrim and you had chronic back pain your whole life for decades, always in pain. And you go over to Lourdes and say you were in the baths or you were drinking the water or you were in one of the processionals or at mass or praying at the grotto or wherever, and you suddenly feel like, oh my gosh, I have been healed. I am pain-free after decades of pain. If you want to present your case, you would go to what's called the medical bureau, and this is it. And you would go in and you would give them your name and your information. They would take a lot of information. And the people who sit on the medical bureau, there's always a director of the medical bureau. That's a full-time permanent position. But any medical professional who happens to be in Lourdes or in the area at the time is welcome to sit on the medical bureau. So that's an interesting thing. But you go in and you give them all your information. Then what they're going to want you to do is they're going to send you back to America, in your case, and you have to get all your medical records. So we're talking your MRIs, your x-rays, your doctor's got to, explain, when did this start? What is the diagnosis? What's the prognosis? Have you been treated with what? And, all of that. You gather all that information, you go back to Lourdes. And by the way, when you're going back to Lourdes, it's not like the medical bureau is paying for that. You're doing that on your own time and your own money. And then they're going to want more information, and there's going to be this back and forth of medical information. Then they're going to want the passage of time to make sure your healing is actually permanent and lasting and complete, and not just a little blip on the radar. So time is passing, you're invested in going back and forth and back and forth. And the final stage of the process is for the church to recognize it is you have to have your bishop approve this. And this is another stopping point for many cases, because not every bishop has the time or inclination to get involved in these kinds of investigations, and they may just politely bow out. And so what you have is, at the Lourdes Medical Bureau, you have on file over 7,000 cases of remarkable, I mean, truly remarkable medical improvements that have been claimed, but that are stuck somewhere in the process. There are only 70, and I'll repeat that, 70 miracles that have been deemed, authentic. So you can start to realize, why is that number so small if millions of people are going there? Well, that number is small because of the reason I just said about the lengthy medical investigations. And then you have the fact that there's a lot of people, say you did go over there and you had some kind of healing. Maybe you don't want to present yourself. Maybe you just want to go home and say, thank you, God, for my healing. I feel better and I'm glad. So many people don't present themselves. And then there's the psychological healings that people claim over there, whether it's from mental illness or bipolar or depression. And there's no psychological bureau at Lourdes, so there's no way to analyze those. And then even more so are the people who claim, I had a big conversion of heart. I had a spiritual experience over there where I see the whole world, my life, and everybody differently now. There's no spiritual bureau over at Lourdes to analyze those kinds of healings. So you can really see that it's not truly representative of what people may claim happens as a result of going to Lourdes or pursuing that kind of a pilgrimage. And then the other kind of fascinating aspect, I think, of Lourdes is how ecumenical it has become over the years. I mean, it certainly started as a Catholic phenomenon. Okay, Bernadette was Catholic, it's the church, we're talking about a Marian apparition. But over the years, there have been so many visitors of different Christian faiths, of no faith. We see more and more Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists arriving at the shrine. In fact, one of the cures that's somewhere in the investigative process is a Muslim who has been healed of Crohn's disease while he was in Lourdes. So just really interesting to see what the ecumenical part of this is. It's, again, open to all people of all walks of life, of all beliefs or no belief. And again, it attracts people because of that beauty, because of that history, and because of that spiritual intrigue. And so that is the basic overview of Lourdes. And I wanted to kind of open it up now for any questions or anything you might want to know deeper, so I can kind of tailor this to your interests.
Elizabeth, I'll start. Thank you. That was a great overview, and it looks like a beautiful, amazing place. And I guess my first question is, when you look at where the shrine is and the river location from your picture, is when people are going there, when you talk about this large volume, is the city around it fairly close by where people are staying in hotels and that? Is it just kind of like out of the picture a little ways, or is it like you stay in the city and drive to Lourdes?
Got you. Beautiful question. Thank you. You have to kind of take a bus to get there. It's still in a kind of a remote area. But the thing I love about this shrine is the way they developed it. They really tried to preserve the natural beauty of the surroundings. One of the things they did was literally push the Gov River back, several, like maybe, I don't know how many, 50 feet back away from the shrine, so they could have kind of a promenade alongside the river, because as you saw in that original picture, the grotto was right on the river. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing they've done that's really beautiful is the grounds that are marked as the sanctuary, which would include the grotto and the churches and so forth, are clearly marked with a wrought iron gate or fencing around it. All hotels, souvenir type things, all of that is on the outskirts of that. So people stay in that area. So they do a great job of separating the accommodations for the people. You need the accommodations for the people and the sanctuary itself. And I want to point out too, in this photo, if you see down in the lower right-hand corner, what almost looks like a round football field is actually the largest underground structure, I believe, like in the world. It is literally an underground church that sits like 25,000 people. And they wanted to build, as so many people are coming to this place from all over the world, they needed to keep building. But these original structures above the ground are made out of things like granite and marble, and they're very expensive. To build a giant, structure, we're talking now cement, right? And steel, and kind of butt ugly, in other words. And so someone came up with the idea, what if we built it underground and just had a grassy sloped rooftop on it? And so that's the largest structure. And that's where every Wednesday there's a universal mass there. And again, in multiple languages, and it's just it's a beautiful expression. So.
Other questions?
Elizabeth, if somebody can hear me, just let me know. But
Yes.
I'm curious about Bernadette. How does if you're visiting, are there parts that are dedicated to her, like any type of statues, or how do you learn about the history of her? Obviously you wrote the book, but a regular tourist going, how would you learn about this as you're going through it all?
Right. Well, again, most people who go there as pilgrims have an idea what happened there and why they're going there. But I would imagine if someone was going to look at this, they could research it, online and get some background. They do still have Bernadette's house, a dwelling she lived in. She actually, believe it or not, was so poor that at the time that this event happened, she and her family they used to have a flour mill at the time. This is one of the problems that was happening, the economic depression of that part of France, because of Industrial Revolution, all these outlying areas were getting very depressed economically, and the flour mill went under, as many did. And so this family was basically going to be out on the street. They had nowhere to live, and someone opened up to them the old town jail called La Cachot, the lockup. And so she was living in this one room dwelling, 4 children and the parents, and that structure still remains. So you can go, for instance, and see that. Lourdes doesn't make Bernadette herself some kind of great, like, as we always say as Catholics, we don't worship saints. So like Bernadette was, she has been named a saint by the church, but it was based on character and all that sort of stuff. But we always stress she was just an ordinary person who God used for this purpose, and we can see the fruits 150 years later. So yeah, there is. I remember seeing a statue, of Bernadette and Our Lady somewhere on the grounds, but it would be, I think it would really be on the person going there to kind of find out a little bit about it, like what is this place? Which I think most people do today. I would imagine most people today would be kind of researching, like, why am I going there? What happened there 150 years ago? Does that help a little bit?
Yes.
Ken, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions and comments. Elizabeth, this is why we love Rotary, because I would never have known the information that you just presented if it wasn't for you being here with us in Rotary. And I am a retired architect.
Wow.
And you just said something that maybe everyone else just didn't pay any attention to, but it was like bells going off in my head. You used the word accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you all know that in 1990, the United States adopted the Americans with Disability Act.
Yes.
And you just said that they realized the importance of accessibility way back in the 1800s. And I'm thinking, how is it possible that we didn't get it? If that much time that somebody had discovered it. The whole issue of polio is also, part of Rotary. And I was thinking about all of the places around the world that have so-called mineral water. And I'm curious now about what's the common denominator about these places where people go for health reasons to bathe in the mineral water. There's one in Florida, in West Florida.
Yes. I would love to address that. That is such a good point. So if I'm good, I know you may have more other questions. Let me just jump in. So here's the interesting thing. You said exactly right. There were mountainous towns like Lourdes that were very famous for their spas, for those springs, those natural springs that would spring up, and people would go to the mountains to take the waters, they would say, right? Lourdes, prior to this whole event, had no springs. They had no natural spas. So here they are, a mountainous town. No one was going there for any kind of, healing or miracles or anything like that. So when this spring got uncovered, the mayor of the town was like, oh boy, this is going to be good for us. And he had the waters tested. And the funny thing is they found no minerals in it, nothing in it that would have any healing quality at all. And yet people would come and claim. And Bernadette made a very famous statement about the water, because if you remember from the story, the vision never told her, when you dig the spring up, all these people are going to be healed. All she said was, wash in that water for the sins of the world, as an act of penance. But yet all these healings are happening. And Bernadette made a famous statement. She said, the healing of the water is not the water itself, but it's the faith of the user. So that's a really important point. So it's so interesting that they actually scientifically tested the water in hopes that, the mayor was going to say, oh, I could really take this and run and get more and more tourists, because nobody was really going to Lourdes prior to this. It was off the beaten path and had no natural spring waters.
Thank you. That's all I had, basically.
And the other thing I'll finish with Ken's question about that is, obviously there are a lot of people who go there in hopes of something. And obviously a lot of people come back and maybe they die of their cancer, they die of their chronic condition, or it remains unchanged. But I will say this, I truly believe that people who go to this place will come back with a gift. Now, the gift may not be a physical, mental, or spiritual healing necessarily, but what I think can happen, and I'll speak for myself. So first of all, you go over there, and by seeing all this suffering humanity displayed before you, and again, suffering humanity, just because someone's not in a wheelchair or not on a gurney doesn't mean they're not suffering, right? Many people suffer, and their wounds and their brokenness is and invisible. So you have all this suffering before you. First of all, it makes things, you kind of put it in perspective, and you realize, oh wow, my cross isn't as big as so many people here. And I think that can give you some appreciation of what you're dealing with. And I think also it can remind you, and this was powerful for me, is how many people do suffer. And it opened my eyes to realize, when I go back to my corner of the world, to my circle of influence, I need to be more mindful of people who are suffering, and to be more compassionate, like Bernadette was, like these original residents of Lourdes, and like the volunteers are today, that, to reach out. How can I be of service? How can I be more patient if you're not moving as fast as I need to move today in the grocery store, or whatever it is? So it kind of makes you appreciate that. And I think everybody comes back strengthened to some degree or another, that I can continue on my life. I'm stronger. It is that refreshing, that rejuvenating place where you can draw from and then continue your life forward.
I think on that note, there's that shared experience of that there's so many people also carrying the load, when
Yes.
you're there, it's like you all of a sudden have this realization that you're not alone with carrying your burden, that there's so many other people there. And so I think that is the kind of place people go and they feel like, I am not alone, that.
Yes, absolutely.
Candace, you had a question?
Well, I did. That's actually, those comments are a little tough to follow, because I just, they were beautiful and really capture the spirit of the entire presentation. So I'm glad you went there, both of you. My question is actually about the water you brought back. And because you said you used to be able to bring gallons back with you, what did you do with the water that you brought back with you?
So we still have, we have this giant jug. But what I would do is, if I encountered someone I knew who was suffering, and despite their faith or no faith, I would mention a little bit about Lourdes and I had this water, and I would offer it to them. You can't force things upon people, and most people would receive it. And I would tell them, you can drink this, or you can apply it to the part of your body that might have an ailment, or whatever. And so it's just a way that I choose to evangelize. This is only one of many, obviously, but yeah, so I offer it for anyone, who might be interested, and just remind them what Bernadette said, it's the faith of the users. So, and obviously, and I will say, as I know that Rotary Club is a secular organization, but my feeling is always that God, ultimately God's in charge. And so he's going to decide, and we hope that we can follow his will, patiently, and know that he knows what's best for us and stuff. So you can't guarantee results with it, but yeah, I've shared it with quite a few people over the years.
Well, thank you. And what a wonderful service. I do have a comment, and I hope you'll forgive me if it sounds very irreverent, but my sister who lives in Boston just recently went to St. Augustine and was extremely disappointed that the water there just tasted pretty bad. If anybody's ever tried to taste it, it's very sulfury and so to hear that the water over in Lourdes is clean and crisp and clear, and there's got to be an allegory there about chasing youth or chasing redemption and health.
Well, it is mountain water. I mean, it's still, and it is cold mountain water all year long. So those baths are cold. But yeah, so yeah, and it has not seemed to have changed, that we've owned it now for how many years is it? Since 2006. So
thank you.
I have another comment.
Yes.
Elizabeth, you just made reference to Rotary being secular. And I have a different perspective about that. In fact, I've been using a phrase, how to talk about politics and religion in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
And Rotary, I believe, is one of the most significant organizations in the world where the diversity of belief is set aside for the purpose of helping others. So it's not secular. It's a beautiful way that people with different perspectives and worldviews can agree to work together for the benefit of others, which is part of what most religions really do.
Mm-hmm. Well
but
said.
they all tend to be in their own lane. And Rotary has figured out a way to have us all be on the same path. So thank you for actually opening that door.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. And that was well said, by the way.
Yeah,
Thank you.
awesome.
Comments or thoughts or questions for Elizabeth?
I have 8 minutes more of questions.
I bet you do, Ken. And I was going to email you afterwards. After I asked my first question, I almost said, Ken, did you pick up on the accessibility? But I knew the answer before I asked the question.
Now, I thought Ken was gonna. I thought Ken was going to comment on the architecture of the place and being built on top of the mountain, because quite honestly, that's pretty impressive. How they decided to build it into the rock right above the grotto and then make it accessible.
Julia, thank you for that opening. Actually, that's my questions 8 through 14. Yes, I actually have designed many churches. In fact, I'm a professional facilitator because I was trained in the process of creating a vision for organizations. In fact, I was trained by a consultant for the Lutheran Church on how to create a vision for a congregation. And so I'm very familiar with the whole concept of, why you build a church. It's based on a vision. And in this case, it's really clear what the vision was. And from a structural standpoint, it is amazing how churches were able to stand this long considering when they were built. And fortunately, if they're not in an earthquake zone or a hurricane zone, they tended to build massive structures, and they didn't have building inspectors back then. They just waited until something failed and figured out why it failed, and then they built it stronger the next time. So flying buttresses were the result of, well, we can't figure out any other way to hold this wall up, so let's figure out how to support it from the outside. That is a true test of time of how these structures have been able to. We don't know how often they were remodeled or refurbished. That would be an interesting story in itself, this particular one. So Elizabeth, I don't know if you know any of the history of the sequence between when it was built and now, and how many times it's been modified.
These are the original structures, because as I said, the first one, which is that tallest one in this picture, was built in 1858. And then because it was too small, they built the one in front of it, and they continue to build. So these are the original structures. I wanted to point out an architectural detail that I think Ken might appreciate. So we're kind of off to the side in this picture. But if you were a bird or a drone and you kind of went to the right and kind of were square on with the way this church is. So you see the ramp there. That ramp is curved and coming down. Well, there's an identical ramp on the other side. So you have two curved ramps that are coming down. And the architects wanted to symbolize like the arms of God welcoming all people to this place. So I thought that was kind of a neat function
well
and
done.
meaning.
Right. And can you, when you go for a tour, can you go into the original church as part of your walkthrough?
Oh my gosh, yes. All the churches are active. That's where, so there's masses in all languages all over the place. There, you can, you have to arrange this in advance, but you can have a prayer, a service or a worship service at the grotto itself, but there's during certain hours. That's one thing too that's neat about the grotto is there are signs when you get there to the actual grotto where it's like silencio, as my Italian friends here would say, silence. And it is like you could hear a pin drop. It is very sacred. It's just people are very respectful. And that was one of the things that really struck me is how intensely people are praying there. And you don't know, as I said, what they're all carrying, what they're bringing there. We brought a bunch of petitions with us. We asked all our friends and family, hey, we're going there if you have any petitions. And so people would email us that. Now, this was like weeks and days leading up to our trip. I was so busy getting ready to do, as a journalist, getting ready. All I was doing was cutting and pasting those petitions into a document. I printed it out. I had no time to look at it. And the time I did get to look at it, to read it and pray it was one of my afternoons off. And I went to the grotto and I pulled this out of my backpack. And I mean, just what people were sharing was unbelievable. They were just pouring their heart out. And so I just, read it in my heart. Obviously, you have to be silent, but, and I really believe those prayers got lifted up at that moment. It was really, really powerful how people just really opened up and shared quite personal things. So.
That was awesome.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for the presentation. Wonderful. I was aware of Lourdes' power, but I didn't know this much. And I appreciate it for giving us all the insight. And if you're looking for inspiration, Italy is full of many of those wonderful faith stories and miracles that have been claimed all over the country. So I'm sure you will be interested, probably know, and maybe you're already
have
the next book in mind.
Italy is amazing. Italy is beautiful. Yes, I've had the privilege. Love to go back.
Elizabeth, thank you. Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for everybody who is with us today. Elizabeth, please stick around for just a second.
Sure.
I first want to say again a big thank you to Nancy and to Rick for joining us as guests, and Phoebe. So glad that y'all were here. And Elizabeth, of course, we're so thankful that you were here. I think you can tell from the comments and the questions that you have touched many hearts, and the inspiration you provided, and as Ken so well explained, so much of what you talked about touched on what Rotary is all about. And the service aspect of people volunteering to go over there and help really just speaks volumes to me personally. I want to thank Candace for helping me find a book for you today. What we do for our speakers, since we're a virtual club and we can't reach out and give you a coffee mug or something like that, we support little free libraries, and we try to find a book that somehow speaks somewhat to the speaker. And this is a Caldecott Honor Award book. The author and illustrator, Mika Archer, wrote and illustrated this book called Wonder Walkers. And basically, two children set out, and as children do, experiencing the world from a whole different viewpoint than sometimes adults do. So while this is written for children and beautifully illustrated with oils and kind of a tissue paper overlay, much like Eric Carl does in his books, this is one that I think would go side by side with your book to say, hey, there are many experiences all through our life that we can wander through and find. We just need to go out there and do it. And I think you certainly encouraged us to do that today. So thank you so very much for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.